everyone to episode 14 of HR Leaders Live, the show where we discuss the future of work with today's most innovative and successful people leaders. The topic of today's show is strategic HR planning. As always, my name is Chris Rainey, co-founder of HRD Leaders and host of the HR Leaders podcast. I'm joined by Jill Katz, CHRO at Assemble HR, and Matt Burns, Chief HR Officer over at YISC. And today's special guest is Tim Mulligan, CHRO at Vulcan. Hello, everyone. How are you?
Hello. Hey, good. Great. Hi.
We're live from Geneva Airport, guys, just in case you're wondering when you're looking at my background and where we are today. Firstly, I want to congratulate Matt for your graduation today, Matt. Congratulations. Matt's just graduated for his MBA. How's it feel, Matt?
It's great to have my life back.
Fantastic. So as I mentioned, our guest today is Tim Mulligan. Tim, for those of our listeners that don't know you, let us know a bit about yourself and your journey to where we are today.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having, and congrats, Matt. And I'm excited to be here. Broadcast live from rainy Seattle, which is too bad in the summer. But yeah, so my background, I've been in my current role, which is Chief HR Officer for Vulcan, which is, I'll talk about in a moment, in Seattle. I've been here about a year and a half. But I was living in San Diego for the past 17 years. I've spent about 8 years in human resources, and before that, operations in the hotel industry. I worked for Starwood Hotels and Resorts up here in Seattle, and then I got moved down to San Diego. Even prior to that, I was a lawyer by trade. So I did a couple years in employment law, and then decided that I really missed the hospitality industry, which is where I came from. And so I joined Starwood. I quit my legal career and entered the HR world back in, mid-90s, and worked for Starwood Hotels and Resorts here in Seattle in HR. And then I got shipped, like I said, down to San Diego, where I oversaw first one big hotel, and then all the hotels in Seattle, and then I had hotels in LA and Palm Springs, and had a lot of fun in the hotel industry in Southern California. But then I got a weird call in 2004, looking for a very unique HR position, which was the Chief HR Officer for the San Diego Zoo. I thought I was being punked at first, and because I actually lived a block from the zoo.
What a great phone call to have.
It was very interesting, and then I just the timing was right for me. I was at a point in my HR career where I was wondering, what was next? Do I continue what I'm doing? Do I go corporate and move to New York with Starwood? And at the same time, I was in the process of curating a family. I was adopting some children, so the San Diego Zoo call came at the right time and just got me really excited to do something completely different. And work for a nonprofit, work for a mission-based organization, and just do something. And plus, the challenge that was presented to me was really exciting, which was to scrap, what had been done in the past, and kind of take the San Diego Zoo to way, way, way above where they were in terms of the employee experience. And so that was too enticing to me. So I started that role in 2004, and I actually worked in that role for 12 years up until Vulcan, when I got another strange call asking me if I wanted to come work for a gentleman named Paul Allen in Seattle. And so it brought me back to the Northwest. And again, that call came at a good time when I was wondering, after 12 years at the San Diego Zoo, what was next? And am I going to stay in the zoo industry, the nonprofit industry? What's next for me? And then this Vulcan call came literally at the right time, and I just kind of went with it. And so I moved my family up to Seattle, and I've been here for the last year and a half, where I oversee human resources for Vulcan here in Seattle.
Hey, Tim, before we go any further, I have a couple things I want to add.
Please.
The first is huge fan of the San Diego Zoo.
Oh, me too.
Huge fan. I have traveled there with my children. It is, I believe, the best zoo in our country, in the United States. And so whatever it is that you did with your team there, you're going to get a lot of props from me. And I wish I had prepared a photo slideshow of myself and my children moving our way through the beautiful zoo.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's good to hear. I totally agree with you. I think I raised my kids at that zoo. They spend their summers there, their breaks there. It's just it's an awesome place. Yeah.
It's beautiful. And the second thing is there's a humbling moment here that I'm just going to push on for you, because I noticed that you were named CHRO of the Year in 2016. Was that when you were at the zoo, or was that when you had just started at Vulcan?
Yeah, I mean, 2016 was a kind of a milestone year for me in my HR career. I wrote a book. A co-author of mine, Sandy Ash, who was a consultant that we used at the zoo for many years, and her and I put together, I think, some pretty cool training programs at a nonprofit budget. And I think Sandy and I were able to put together some nationally recognized training programs for this nonprofit industry that kind of resonated in the HR world. And so I spoke a lot to zoos and aquariums, and then into the SHRM kind of cycle of what we're doing at the zoo. And then I decided to write a book about it. So we wrote a book about the centennial of the San Diego Zoo, and it's called ROAR: How to Build a Resilient Organization, the world famous San Diego Zoo Way. And that came out in May of 16. We put together a model for resiliency that any organization can use. And my role was really using San Diego Zoo as an example. So putting all the great programs we put in place, how far we'd come at the zoo, and why at 100 years old in 2016, why was San Diego Zoo operating at the top of all of its cylinders in terms of highest employee satisfaction, highest lowest turnover, highest revenue, highest attendance, all these great metrics at age 100. And that's what the book was about. Then that came out in May of 16, and then a month later, I won that award of CHRO of the year. So it all happened pretty quickly. And then a few months later, I quit and got headhunted for the Vulcan job. So it all kind of escalated from there. It was a big year, but I think the book and the award helped me with the next move in my career, most definitely.
Did everyone at the award ceremony say, "We can't compete with the zoo guys"?
I was surprised. I don't know. There were some pretty amazing folks that were also recognized. To come from a nonprofit and win that award, it was awesome. It was surprising, but it's a culmination of my 20 years in HR. So.
Fantastic. Well, just out of curiosity, in that environment, because it's very unique, right? You can't really compare that to any other environment. What was the biggest challenge you faced when you first joined, just out of curiosity?
Lions.
The lions, perhaps. No, I would say the reptile house, since I was terrified of snakes. I came a long way in my 12 years there, but I think there are a lot of challenges, but there are exciting challenges. That's why I took the job, because I was excited by the challenges. What was the biggest challenge was what the board had tasked me to do, which was to take the San Diego Zoo and bring it into the modern era of human resources, but yet the budget wasn't changed. So it is a nonprofit. It's it's one of the top tourist attractions in the world, but it is a nonprofit organization. We didn't have much of a budget to work with. So my challenge was to come up with great, employer of choice type training programs, recognition programs, comp benefits, you name it, and brand it, put a fun spin on it, and make it look like, that these programs could compete with all, the for-profit industry. And I told my team when I started that the HR team there, that my goal was that within a year, we wanted to start winning, the best place to work in San Diego. And I wanted to create a team, an HR team and organization that not just San Diego or zoos, but just any organizations in the country would say, let's call the San Diego Zoo because look what they're doing. And that was the challenge, the gauntlet I threw down for my team. And they rose to the occasion through a lot of strategic planning and excitement and, uncomfortableness, but thinking outside the box, and it started working. And I think we left there, when I left there, it was a great time. And we won several years of best place to work in San Diego and recognition for our program. So I'd say to answer your question, the whole thing was a challenge, but it was an exciting challenge that we prioritized and I think did it in the right way.
That's amazing. And so you brought up the word strategic plan, and that's kind of the core of today's conversation. And so in the spirit of the HR Leaders Live show, I'd like to ask Matt, what is...
coming like 5 miles down the road.
And we're live, so if you have something to share, please just share. I'd love, Matt, why don't you start off by telling us what is a strategic plan?
It's like the first day of my MBA.
Go.
Welcome. So a strategic plan for me is one that involves many different aspects. So when I think about strategy, I think about taking several disparate pieces of information and then distilling it down to an overall plan or a strategy. So what that means for an HR practitioner is a couple things. So first off, you're looking within the organization and talking to your stakeholders at various parts of the organization. And I'm sure Jill, yourself, and certainly Tim, as you joined organizations, the first 1, 3, 6 months of your tenure, you're just asking a lot of questions and listening. You're talking to people in the organization, where are their pain points, what things are working, where do we have opportunities, and you're trying to get a lay of the land, both from the operational level, but certainly strategically and culturally as well, in terms of how the business operates. So understanding the inside workings of the organization is critical. Additionally, and I think increasingly important for HR professionals today, is understanding what's happening outside the four walls of your organization. So that could look like what's happening latest in tech, what's happening in terms of latest best practices around culture. So it's understanding what's happening within the four walls of your organization and also outside the four walls. And what I would also say, Jill, in terms of what's changing lately is increasingly I'm seeing HR leaders reach out to other peers around the world. So when I started this profession 15 years ago, we talked to our friends, a very small social network that we had, people we had worked with. And now increasingly I get phone calls from people from Singapore or from Western Europe or from South America that want to know what's best practices are happening in Canada or the United States. And there's a lot more sharing of information. I think technology has gone a long way to help us achieve that. And I think the culmination of all those pieces, Jill, becomes your strategy, along with, of course, the mandate that you receive from your leadership team or your board.
I would say I love how you sort of broke that up, and in the fact that it's so many disparate pieces that need to come together and all of the facets that play in. And I was recently speaking on a panel about an HR strategic plan also. And one of the comments that I shared with the group is that, 10 years ago when I was 11, what's funny?
I thought you were 10.
I was 11. It was right before my birthday. So 10 years ago, I think that organizations would set forth their business plan. And the business plan would come first and would sort of lead the way. And then human resources, if they had a, quote, seat at the table, 1980s, would try to plot activities along that plan where HR could intersect or interact with the business. And then if you move 5 years in, the seat at the table was starting to be a little over, and there would be a business plan, and then the HR team would create an HR plan that would layer in and maybe sit below the business plan. And it would mimic or model the business plan and put events or HR activities against the business plan that would drive the people strategy. What I think is happening today, and I'm really interested in Tim's perspective, is it really needs to be one plan. Everyone is at the table. The seat at the table thing is so 80s. I threw it out when I threw out my leg warmers. And now there is one plan, and the people plan and the business plan are one, and either plan could tweak the other. And so in order to achieve any business outcome, there needs to be a really clear strategy with the people that will help you get there. Tim, would love to hear your thoughts on how to build and what a strategic plan is.
Well, first of all, if you have any extra leg warmers, can you send them my way, because it's raining.
They're all gone, but I did have a pink pair from a Get in Shape Girl set.
Oh, good.
Anyone who's watching this show today, if you had a Get in Shape Girl, I'd like you to please message me, and I will call you out on Facebook or LinkedIn someday. Okay,
great. I think you nailed that. I think, it's two things. I went from the San Diego Zoo, which really had no strategic plan. We went through a very organized, organizational strategic plan. And like you said, and we had all employees of all different levels working together to say, what is the vision of the San Diego Zoo and what's everyone's role? And the good thing is that plan, about 50% of it was HR. So I think the organization really rallied around the fact that we needed to get our, the structure in place and the kind of bones set for the people experience. So I went through like 3 to 4 different iterations of 3-year plans at the San Diego Zoo which was awesome and great, and I think really shaped my my thinking and how to have an effective HR organization. Here at Vulcan, Vulcan's involved in so many different things. It's such a unique company, way different than any place I've ever worked or heard of. So it's challenging, but our role in HR is the same. It's to say, how are we going to create this culture? And we're involved in so many different diverse businesses and kind of swim lanes. How are we going to put this together? So we spent a whole year last year, my first year, kind of doing what Matt had explained, of really taking a look at what the needs are of what the organization is asking of us, working with the organization also in a long-term financial plan, and then taking that and saying, how can HR support it? So I agree with you. They shouldn't be two disparate plans. They need to be linked together. What I think the fun part of HR strategic planning is what Matt referenced also is the environmental scan, I would call it, and say what's happening out there in the HR world. I think that's one of the reasons I was brought in was Vulcan has grown so quickly and has a great HR team who've been doing some good things, but we pretty much doubled, in the last couple of years. And so taking a look at what the outside world is doing in HR. And so I spent about 6 months just immersing myself in the latest trends in technology, culture, comp and benefits. This is new for me to be in the tech world here in Seattle, which is a whole new world for me. So I had to really educate myself, and I'm still educating myself, but making sure that my team was instead of just, head to the ground working on day-to-day issues, it's taking a few steps back, looking at the big picture and what's happening with the latest economic, technological, legal, and social trends that impact HR, and what of those need to come into Vulcan. So we spent about a year, all of last year, working on this with my team, several off-day, full-day retreats, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of guest speakers, a lot of education, sending people to conferences, bringing it all back and distilling that into a 3-year plan, which we just rolled out this past January. So I can't imagine not having an HR strategic plan. And I'm amazed when I talk to peers, everybody does things differently, but I'm amazed how many HR teams don't have a plan like this. And I don't even know how I would do it if I didn't have this sort of plan. And not just a 1-year plan, like not 1-year goals. I'm talking 3 to 5 years into the future, so you can really prioritize and know, what things can you push off till next year, the year after that, and where should all your focus be for that year. And so I'm a huge proponent of these plans.
I want to jump in for a second.
I would just add to that. Sorry, Chris. I would just add that I think one thing that we need to include, and I think Tim's hit the nail on the head in terms of having that really sound 1-year plan, but also having directional plans 3 to 5 years in the future. Where are we going directionally? Yes, they're going to change, but you can plant a flag somewhere and move that as a directional marker. One thing we also include in our plan, and anyone from my team who's watching this episode is going to laugh because they know that every single meeting we ever have, I start with the exact same slide, which is not only the strategy, but how we work as an HR team. So it's the behaviors and the competencies and our method to our madness, if you will, that we employ. I think that is so critical because you can identify what the work is and what the goal is. But I think within HR, because of the nature of our work and because oftentimes HR leaders are leading through influence and without authority, how we do our work is really, really important to ensure that we're providing a high level of service. So I'll give you an example. One thing that we have very enshrined in our HR strategy is simplicity. So I use the term 80% with speed a lot. And what that means for our organization is don't give me 100% of your best. We're working in retail. It's very disruptive. Our change cycles are very, very, very small. We don't have time, nor do we have the luxury of waiting until something is at its full maturity. This is very much like technology in that give us 80% of your best, give it to us fast, and let's be very transparent with our stakeholders and say, we're going to deliver an imperfect product, but we're going to perfect it with your feedback along the way, and we're going to give it to you much faster than you would have otherwise expected it. I think a lot of times HR professionals are delaying the launch of programs or policies or technologies, trying to drive perfection in their own minds, when in reality, the true test of effectiveness is your stakeholders and how they adopt the programs.
And Matt, isn't that a really interesting point regarding the difference in service or client and partner? So when you think about how HR is changing and has changed, there was a point in time that as an HR leader, I felt like a service provider. So there was a product or a project that my team and I needed to create and deliver, and we worked hard to make it perfect so that when we delivered something to the client, it looked great kind of like a vendor. Now the model has shifted. And so I love what you're saying about delivering something that is imperfect and in draft and in process, because now it's a partnership where there really shouldn't be very much that HR owns singularly without working very, very closely together with the business.
Well, here's the thing, Jill. I mean, let me ask you this. Of all the initiatives that you dropped in 10 years ago that were perfect, how many of them were actually perfect?
Well, for me,
well, I mean, you, yes. I mean, but in terms of how your stakeholders view it, how many thought this is a perfect program, it needs no iterations and none? Because the reality is sometimes we're creating programs in a silo, and then we're dropping it into an operational audience that is trying to rationalize this new program in amongst their already full-time work. So we just cut that off. We just set the expectation up front that we're going to have iteration, we're going to have evolution of concept, and that we want your partnership as stakeholders to help us develop this. So then, you know, when we have the first wave of constructive feedback, which usually occurs right after a pilot or perhaps post-implementation, the HR team is not disincentivized or demotivated by getting constructive feedback. They're now wired to understand and take that feedback as a blessing. And our stakeholders now have a license to give their feedback in a way that says, we want it, we're not all the way there, we're going to get there with your support. So it changes the conversation, to your point, from a service provider to one of that partnership model where we're collaborating on the solution versus us giving you something that we think is perfect and then you adopting it the way you see fit.
I have a question for Tim. Tim, there's probably people who are watching our show today or who will see clips who are hearing the word strategic HR plan and they understand philosophically what that means. But my question is, what does the actual thing look like? So if you were to give a real quick crash course on what the finished document should contain, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's a perfect template. I have what I've worked over the years, an architecture of a plan that I think works great. So the finished product for us is one that we can actually share to the business and regularly communicate to the business, and also be a role model for other departments in the organization to do the same. And I'm even happy sharing my strategic plan for Vulcan, which I'm very proud of, and our team is, with other, with peers of mine in the organization. But I don't have a visual of it here, but I think that I'm a big fan of a one-pager and then a document that shares the plan, mission, vision of your HR team, what's the employee value proposition. We went through a whole exercise last year at Vulcan to say what is the value proposition for applicants and employees here. But then for the plan itself, for like our current plan and the ones I've done in the past, we have 4 areas of focus, we call them. And then for each area of focus, we have specific deliverables for the next 3 years that we've prioritized, years 1, 2, and 3. That way, it's a lot of work, but if there's things that are not on that plan, we can say that doesn't fit with our plan, let's push that off into the future. So for instance, for Vulcan, Vulcan, by the way, is a different type of company. It's not like one industry like retail or even the zoo that I was at before. Vulcan is a network of people working in very complex, different, diverse things. It's Vulcan itself, founded by Paul Allen, who's our founder and owner of Vulcan, co-founder of Microsoft, owner of the Seahawks and the Trailblazers. Vulcan's kind of an incubator, and we take ideas, usually from Mr. Allen, and develop them to tackle some of the world's toughest problems or create inspirational experiences. And we're trying to solve the world's toughest problems using the latest in data and technology. So for instance, we have folks working on restoring coral reefs and ocean health. We're preserving wildlife and elephants in Africa, trying to stop climate change. We're taking on pandemics. We're dealing with the homelessness issue in Seattle. We're trying to create all sorts of new technologies to do this. We also have, Paul's also a big proponent in building the community and also a big fan of arts and culture. So we have we do art festivals and music festivals, and we have Vulcan Productions that does movies and tells the story of all the projects we're working on. And then we also do real estate, which I develop communities around Seattle. And so we have people working all across the boards. And so in one day, I'll go from a pandemic meeting to, I'm helping open up a private hotel right now in Hollywood, to a restaurant we're going to open up in Utah, to a meeting about drones. So it's a very challenging place. So to put that together into a strategic plan and to create a cohesive, exciting culture that has all those kind of employees is pretty challenging. So what we landed with was a 3-year plan. We're trying to tackle some basic buckets of HR. We have one team where, and then I make everyone in HR be involved. So on every one of our 4 areas of focus, regardless if you are a recruiter, a benefits analyst, a HR business partner, a recruiting coordinator, whatever that is, you're all on different teams and you're working on projects that are outside of your everyday work. So everybody's involved with it. We have a culture and engagement team. We're tackling big things like a diversity and inclusion program that we need to have. How do you measure and improve employee engagement? We have cutting edge recognition programs. And by the way, when I say cutting edge, this kind of goes to the nature of our company, in that we have this phrase that we use, which is #only at Vulcan, because we have such a unique, every day is different. And so the challenge we have in HR is, as we introduce or roll out new deliverables or programs, they cannot be off the shelf. They cannot be the one you see down the street at another company. They have to be unique to Vulcan's unique culture. And that's why we call it #only at Vulcan. So we need a D&I program that's really unique and fits our culture. We need a recognition program that's really cutting edge, interesting. It's going to challenge people, be exciting. That's not one you'd see down the street at another company. The second team, we have a team working on total rewards and recruiting. Are we offering the greatest that we can in comp, work-life balance, and a huge initiative on our employment brand, making people aware of what Vulcan is and getting that name out in the community. The third group is working on HR systems and analytics. Are we maximizing our HR technology? I keep saying, the founder of our company, is a co-founder of Microsoft. We should be setting the bar in HR technology. And maybe we haven't been in the past, but it hasn't been a focus. And now we are. We're trying to make sure that we are looking at the latest technology. We're going with some new partners that maybe haven't, some newer companies that people maybe haven't heard of. So I think that's exciting. And then also we're going 100% paperless, which I think we all should do. And then the fourth group is leadership development. Next levels of leadership development all throughout Vulcan, all different levels. Improving the HR team's business acumen, making sure our team really understands the financials, the science, the technology, the philanthropic initiatives, because it is an interesting portfolio here at Vulcan. And then we've also been asked to really spearhead change management in the organization. So to answer your question, the deliverable for us, and what I've used in the past, is a nice, what you can put on a glossy one-page poster, are 4 areas of focus and the main 3 initiatives that we're working on under each one. And that's worked out very, very well for me and my teams in the past.
I love the way that you structure the plan. I also love the 4 categories that you have called out for Vulcan. I did not realize that you were going to ask me to be in a Vulcan movie while we were on this show, and I'm so embarrassed.
Call me later.
But the answer is, I'll give you my agent's phone number when this.
It's me, by the way.
Right. And it's tricky because we have everything I just described is for Vulcan, and we have about almost 1,000 employees here at Vulcan, and we're all tasked with putting Paul's vision of solving these the world's toughest problems and creating these great communities here around Seattle and the world. But then we also work very closely with the rest of the Paul Allen network. So we want to make sure we're helping out and being a good partner, if not, harmonizing our efforts with the Seattle Seahawks and the Portland Trailblazers and the Seattle Sounders. And we have a Brain Institute and a Robotics Institute. So we have all these other, kind of parts of the network that we're trying to align as well. So everyone in the whole Paul Allen network, though they may not be a Vulcan employee, is having a similar type experience, which is a big challenge, but it's a fun one.
Guys, I want to jump in for a second here. Can I jump in for a second, Matt? First of all, thank you for sharing with us your process. I think it's very interesting for people to see it broken down in the steps that you went through. Coincidentally, it was one of the big topics that we had at this workshop that we just delivered here in Geneva. So I think about 5 years ago, Nestle decided to completely just throw out their current HR strategy and start from scratch. And we had their chief talent officer yesterday basically telling us the whole journey that they've been through. And whilst we was on this call, I'm not exaggerating, I've just been emailed the notes and the feedback from all of the 30 chief HR officers in the room on what their advice would be in creating a HR plan. And it's on my iPad. I've actually just been sent it. So I wanted to share with you guys the advice that they put forward to other leaders. So the first thing that they said is, which came across the whole room, is if you're starting from scratch, simplify everything.
Yeah.
Make it as simple as possible. I think Jean-Christophe told me he had, when I was looking at what they look in their leaders and what attributes they look for, there was like 16 criteria. For example, it was just ridiculous. And then it had a whole nother set of metrics in a different department, and it was just a bit of a nightmare. So first piece of advice for anyone who's creating a strategic HR plan: simplify, guys, simplify. Secondly, make it personable. What does it mean for the people in the team? What does it mean for the employees? What does it mean for the business? People have to understand what it means for them. To be on board, because there is going to be that change of mindset that needs to happen whilst you're building the new plan for the organization. Thirdly was, don't change it often. Don't change it. People seem to build a plan and start changing it straight away or after a year or so. Add to it, tweak it, but don't change it. Stick with it. Seems to be the plan for everyone. Thirdly, seems to be formulate the strategy with the senior leaders in the business. Sounds like a bit of an obvious one, but work with the senior leaders and the board to create the strategy. So you're not then creating the strategy and then going to have to try and sell it internally after, which seems to be something which happens pretty often. And I have heard that quite a lot. The other is really, inspire the leadership team to push it with you throughout the organization as well, and make sure that you're all on the same page. You're all telling the same story for the other leaders. And then lastly, add some flexibility and diversity if it's needed throughout as well. So then there does need to be some flexibility in there as well, because things will change. So those are just a few things. I'm not going to go through the whole list, guys, but I just thought it was pretty interesting. I just got emailed this as we was on the show. I wanted to share with you all. And then the last thing I would say, you mentioned earlier about looking at outside what's going on. I think we need to look beyond what's happening in HR outside, but I want to make sure everyone listening understands we're not talking about just looking outside of what's happening in HR, but we're talking about the world. What's happening in blockchain, for example. How's that going to affect HR? What's happening in AI, etc. I think HR leaders now need to be looking outside of HR and making sure that they're ahead of the game as opposed to reacting when things change. So just wanted to add that. I'll let you jump back in, Matt. There.
Appreciate it. And I was just going to say one thing that I think touches on all these points, and I'm glad you mentioned that because it actually reinforces this point. And to answer your question, Jayla, one thing I've been using the last probably 9 to 12 months is a business model canvas. So traditionally, you would build a business model canvas for a startup. For a new business, you'd use it to assess things like your core competencies of your company, who are your customers, et cetera, et cetera. And we can certainly share an example of that after the show in the comments. I use that because I actually view an HR department now as a startup. Because of the amount of change that has to happen in most organizations from where the HR function is to where it needs to be, you almost have to start from scratch. So by using a strategy canvas, I adapted, of course, to fit some of the paradigms of HR, but we look at things really holistically across the entire spectrum. And I find that really helps inform, the strategy, both in the short term and the long term. So for those individuals looking for, to Jill's point, that document, it's a one-pager. It looks like a Scrum board. So for anyone who knows me, they know I'm nearly obsessed with Post-it notes. So it's basically Post-it notes on a canvas that says, here are your strategies, here's where you play. And why I enjoy it is generally I have most of a strategy formulated in my brain, but until I see it on paper, I don't realize where I have gaps or where I may be a bit shy in terms of details or around measurables. So this process for me allows me to A, close those gaps, and then B, to Tim's earlier point, socialize it very easily. It's a one-page document. I can send it to anybody in the organization, within HR, outside of HR. I've shared it outside the organization as well. And individuals can go, I understand that. I may not understand the details behind it, but I understand directionally where you're going. And then when we have alignment around the basic principles, then we can flush out the tactical programs and the measurables and the KPIs that we want to drive within that. The other thing I would just add around deliverables is, and I love what Chris said around simplicity. Of course, I talked about it earlier in the show. I have a very simple process around simplicity. I have a top 3 objectives per day, a top 3 objectives per week, a top 3 objectives per month, and they constantly rotate. and I focus on the critical things every single day that need to happen. And then everything else that I have to figure out through my day has to be accommodated around those three things. Otherwise, within HR, given the amount of things that are thrown at us day to day, it can get very easily, you can lose control of your schedule and really accomplish nothing on your list because you're helping the rest of the organization all the time. So by having those critical priorities in your day, in your week, in your month, you can still support the organization, which is our primary function, but move the needle on the strategic initiatives that you need to drive in order to have success in the future.
Tim, what do you think is our key function as HR leaders in organizations?
Well, that's a great question. I think that I was just thinking as Matt was speaking, I think if you're the leader of HR in the organization, I think my main goal would be to, again, have that plan in place, be a great partner for the executive leadership team and your CEO. But also, I think at some point, what got me here to be the leader of HR is stuff that I love, employee relations, training, recruiting, things that I've done over the years, but I have to step away from that now. Make sure I have the right team in place who can do those things. And it's hard, I think. It's hard to give that stuff up. I mean, every day I'm tempted to jump in and say, let me do that, or let me handle that, or what's going on here. I think to answer your question, my role is to make sure that we're headed in the right direction as an HR team, that we are, we've assessed the needs of the company and we're providing what they want, but also helping them get to the right, to the right point. So I feel like my role now here at Vulcan as CHRO is to really make sure that I'm the one driving the strategy. I have the right team in place. Everyone's working on the right, we have the right resources in place. We're doing the right things for the organization. We're shaping the culture. And I'm the one who brings that, but I need to make sure that my team knows that. So if I'm not in there in the trenches every day, my team needs to know why. That's great. If you guys need me, I'm right here. I'm working on strategy. I'm selling this to the CEO. I'm going to this conference. I'm following up on the strategic planning team. And it's a different role than many of us. And I know it's challenging with a smaller HR team perhaps, but here I have a team of about 28 just here at Vulcan. So I'm able to step back, block time on my calendar where I'm just innovating and just ideating. And I love that. So I think that's the role. And it's been a tough change for me because, I like to put my lawyer hat on and jump in there and handle employee relations and do the stuff that I love that got me here today. But that's not what I'm being paid to do. I'm being paid to strategize and lead the future of this organization. So I hope that answers your question. I think it's more of a kind of a strategizer, a leader, and letting the team handle the day-to-day work with my advice, when needed.
He's creating the conditions for success.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That's what it's about. It's about creating conditions for success. So whether it's resources, whether it's culture, whether it's alignment within the organization, I think any good CHRO creates the environment for success to occur. And then to Tim's point, he gets out of the way and lets his team do the really good work.
Yeah, and constantly answering the question of how do we make this company the kind of place that we want it to be?
That's exactly right.
And I think that question alone, and as I have led HR organizations in my past, that's sort of been my motto question. How do I show up today, tomorrow, the rest of this week and the rest of this month and ensure that this company is the kind of company that we've decided it's going to be? And then what are all the activities that my team needs to work on, lead, partner with?
Yeah, if I could add one thing, it's, the owner, founder of our organization, Paul Allen, wrote a book called The Idea Man. And he, one of the things he's constantly doing is asking a question of, what doesn't exist right now that should exist? And I've been taking that model, that kind of mantra into human resources and saying, what are we not doing that we should be doing? Or what are we doing that's, not great that could be great? Or, what's next for us that we haven't even thought about yet? So I'm kind of using that same methodology which is the vision of this company, which is solve these big problems. I'm using that same question and asking it to my HR team and saying, what are we missing here? What do we not have here that we should have? And how do we get it?
What do you do? And I think that this is a question for all of us. And even Chris, I would love to hear what you may have learned in Geneva. Sometimes the HR strategic plan is signed off on. I actually, there's a client I'm working with right now at a well-known company in New York City, and the HR strategic plan was a phenomenal plan. We actually built it together very much like how you described your plan, Tim. We actually had 3 key pyramids. We had sub-bullets below each. The CEO, the COO, the CFO all signed off on the plan. The plan was rolled out. Life was good. And as things in the business have happened, in flies that word agility. And that word agility means we expect you to move and shake and flex with what's happening with the business. And 2 of your 3 key pillars now need to move off, and they should be replaced with these things. And the items that were these things really are not in line with what that HR leader believes is the most critical focus to make sure that the organization is the kind of organization they want it to be. And I'm sure that in all of our lives as HR leaders, wherever it is that we have worked, we've all encountered something like this. So I'd love to know, how have you managed through these? And do you have any really great examples or stories that you can share? And Matt, I would love you to go first.
I would love. Yeah, this is a challenge in every organization. And I think, when I think about what you talk about, Jill, I think about project management in the context of waterfall versus agile. So when I grew up in the HR organization, again, 15 years ago, we created 1, 3, and 5 year strategic plans, and they were generally locked in. So we operated independently from the organization. When you talked about your story before about how HR and the business have had 2 plans, the analogy I always think of is like 1950s America households. Like HR was meant to be seen but not heard. So like you can do your stuff, but like don't bother the core business. And as long as it didn't come in conflict with the core business, we kind of let you do what you want to do. Over the course of time, we've integrated within the business, because I think most organizations now appreciate that really there isn't a business without your employees, and therefore the group that is meant to champion on behalf of your employees needs to have a strong voice around the table. Mm-hmm. In terms of your particular question and how you handle the agile pieces, I don't build long-term detailed strategic plans, because I think it sets up the team for disappointments, and it sets an expectation that we're actually going to realize that plan. So as I mentioned before, we're creating a 1-year plan that's generally anchored in mandate from the business. And I went back to this 80% with speed concept. We try and put projects in the context of what we can accomplish in a single fiscal year. So oftentimes in large organizations, the decisions that you talked about, Jill, are driven by finances. So strategic priorities shift, money needs to move in the organization, we need to make investments in this part, maybe not this part. So I work really hard with the team to make sure that whatever initiatives we have, we can close them in a fiscal year, or at least have a real key milestone and deliverable that we can say, the fiscal year has ended, this is what we've accomplished. Then we can step back, assess where we're at, and then decide, are we going to proceed with the business's endorsement, or are we going to have to adjust our approach and future-proof it, if you will. So I think just the basic structural design of how you launch initiatives needs to be rethought of. If you're going to create a 3-year project plan, don't be surprised if 12 months into it, 15 months into it, 20 months into it, your plan is no longer your plan. So I would never create a 3-year project plan, because to me, it's a recipe for failure right from the start. But within the organization, I think that's where Tim's earlier comment comes into play, which is you need to be in constant contact with your CEO, CFO, your COO, your board of directors to understand where they're at. Oftentimes, these conversations come up where somebody has a great idea, they see an article on HBR, or they watch something on a podcast. Maybe they saw our show, Jill, and they want to change their strategy. And I think being part of the conversation, having a close connection with those C-suite leaders allows me anyway to suss out what is driving the ask. And then I can be part of the conversation before the decision is made and influence the conversation and say, yes, I love this strategic priority. Let me tell you how what we already have in place is foundational and how this can be built on top of it. So I think for me, it's balancing those things, looking at the structure of how you look at projects and strategy in your strategic plan. And then secondly, it's how you engage with your key stakeholders in the organization so that you are in discussions before somebody has a great idea and now wants it to be implemented.
I completely agree with Matt. You took most of the things, Matt. Thank you very much. I was going to say anyway. Yeah, I know. But one thing I would say, which is a bit controversial, is the very senior leaders that I speak to, there are certain situations where you have to put your foot down and you have to say no. I had a situation at our event yesterday where their company was actually losing market share, losing employee. It was a very bad situation. I'm not going to mention the companies. And at the time, the CHRO invested £10 million whilst I was going through that into training and development. And they had a CEO, I'm not going to mention the name, fly over and go, "What are you doing? We've just told you we're going to shift the strategy. We're losing market share, we're losing employees, etc." And then, no, this is what we need to do to combat that, and actually put their job on the line and said, well, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I believe in. If you don't like it, then maybe I shouldn't be here. Because why are you paying me to do this job if you're going to just tell me what to do anyway? It's a bit but that's the reason I wanted to point it out is this is not the first time I've heard this, but this is real life. This is not something you learn when you study HR. It's not something that people will talk about, but the most successful leaders that I speak to sometimes are willing to put their job on the line. If it's genuinely a situation like you mentioned, Jill, where it is the best for the business, this is exactly what you're doing, you have to be willing to put your foot down, whether it's the CEO or whoever it may be, if it's in the best interest of the organization. And that was a big eye-opener from what I saw yesterday. Apart from that, I completely agree with what Matt said. HR is the business, so you have to be able to shift with the business if it's necessary. And if you have a 3-year plan, don't be surprised if that's going to change along the way. So I wouldn't have anything else to add to that.
I would just add my thoughts on this is kind of a hybrid of what you guys are saying. I feel that the HR team put a lot of thought and work and interviews with stakeholders and put together this plan. For me, it is a 3-year plan prioritized of initiatives and projects. I wouldn't say there's one project, to Matt's point, the last 3 years. We have, most projects are planned and delivered within the year. We might put off some priorities till year 2 or year 3. The business throws curveballs at us every day. There's always things being thrown at us, and our job is to make that work. But I also feel that for the plan, my job is to protect the HR team and see where these projects and initiatives fit into our plan. So, if there's a new initiative that comes my way, I would look at the plan and say, look, we don't have time for that this year. This is what we're working on. Can we do that next year, work it into the plan? Or does it logically fit into one of the buckets we already have, and I have a team that I can give that to? So I feel like I kind of am the one who's the gatekeeper for new projects that come our way, and how that fits in with the HR strategy. When we hire people here at Vulcan, we're looking for something our CEO, Bill Hilf, challenged me with, is look for people that are creative, courageous, and have courage, and are fast-paced and high tempo. We have things thrown at us every day, and we're used to that. I'm not saying that has to change the strategies and the priorities of the plan we have in place. That's just stuff we have to pivot and make work. But I am a strong proponent in my years of HR that we can stick to the plan, and we can push back when we need to, or we can prioritize initiatives thrown our way within the plan we have, and not put to the back burner the projects that we're working on. And I'm usually the one who's holding tight on that plan. So I think every company is a little different,